Hello, I'm Frost, and in this Age of Wonders Planetfall video I am going to be covering the Stegosaurus update, which is update version 1.101, which happened at the same time as the Revelations DLC. Okay, so we have a lot to get through, but I'm going to try and go through it as quickly and concisely as possible. First things, patch notes are going to be down below in the description if you want to go into everything in detail. You should be aware as well that the Stegosaurus update is also relevant to all of you that have downloaded the DLC, the Revelations DLC, as this patch happened at the same time, like I just mentioned. I will not be going into the individual changes to units, secret tech, factions, weapons, simply because we would be here for an hour or two. And I want to keep this nice and brief and bring up really one of the salient points to gameplay. If you're interested in particular details, like you like to play a particular race or you like to use a particular weapon type, then I would suggest you look at the patch notes to know the exact details for those things. Right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is movement. There's been quite a lot of big changes with regards to the movement of units and stuff on the strategic map, and that's going to come in really useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the society research, and what I want to show you straight away is colony infrastructure is tier 3, and this one in particular, transit infrastructure. Now this used to be much higher up the skill tree, and they've moved it all the way down so you can get it kind of early game, and this is really important because what it allows you to do is it doubles the movement points for your troops in your own domain. So that means that if you're now involved in early wars, before you struggle to get your units like from one end of your domain to the other, you can now get across much faster, so it makes it much easier to respond. In my guides I've always said this is kind of something you need to train as early as you can, and now it's made even earlier. That is great news. So there you go, transit infrastructure is now a tier 3. The next thing that's changed, which was also an issue, was when you had the large units. So if we go up the skill tree, let's go into the military skill tree, go all the way up. So I'm playing the Amazon at the moment, so that would be the Bombardon and the Pteranodon's fast, the Arborean Queen. Both of those only had 24 movement points. Now as you can see on the screen, that's now gone up to 32 for the Arborean Queen, 32 for the Bombardon. The Pteranodon always had 32, so that was fine. So what that means now is that all of your units, if you've got one of these like large units in your army, before it used to get held up, and if you're trying to move 3 or 4 armies and only one of these is in your armies, it held everybody back. So now on the strategic map, everything can move pretty much at the same speed. You know, obviously the scout units and stuff can do 40, but your main block of your army is now 32 move points. Now what they've done to debuff them and keep them as like large units is on the tactical grid there is now a new debuff called cumbersome, and what that does is it actually restricts their movement on the tactical map, not on the strategic map. So good news for movement overall. That's going to make it much more interesting and be able to move your armies into fights a lot faster. All right, now the other big change is these new tools called Orbital Relays. Now if I scroll back here, if you've been playing Planetfall, you'll be familiar with the teleport. Now the teleport is put in the scenario for you, but what the Orbital Relays do and the forward relays is they bring teleports to you, so you can put them wherever you want them. Now this is kind of key, and it works in 2 fashions, and there's 2 skill sets. So you can see in Thundering Heights right here, I have an orbital relay, and this essentially is a sector annex. So it's now an extra option that you get when, if I go into the society tree, so a little bit up from College of Infrastructure, it's in tier 5, it's right here, orbital relay development. And you can see it's called orbital relay exploitation. All right, so you get some bonuses. So when you put this in, because you can't, it's an option other than your typical one. So you normally have like research, energy, knowledge, research, energy, production, and so on. And so now you have orbital relay. And so because you're actually sacrificing a sector that would normally use something else, you get a +1 for all the various types. So for food, production, energy, etc. then what happens is that you basically put it down instead of one of your typical sectors. All right. Then on top of that, going back into the tree again, you also get these extra abilities. So you've got logistics base, and you have military assembly base, and then further up the skill tree, you have, when you get to advanced relay infrastructure, you have orbital reinforcement platform and strategic operations platform. And what these are, they are basically bonuses that you can add to your orbital relay. So if I go to my orbital relay now and go to upgrade sector, if we scroll down, there we go. So Thundering Heights, that's my orbital relay. You can see I have orbital logistics base, strategic operations platform, orbital reinforcement platform, military assembly base. And so what the first one does, gives you a bonus to production. Strategic operations gives you a +1 to your strategic points and boosts up your operational defense or operational offense. Your orbital reinforcement platform, this one's interesting. So if you've got a battle going on in this particular colony, then what happens is that every 2 turns it will drop a pod right on top of the enemy army and then spawn some units right next to them. So that's pretty good. I haven't tried it out yet. As you can see, I haven't actually enabled this this feature, but I'm going to be checking that out, as that looks like that can be quite good fun. And then you've got the military assembly base, which is like a colonial medical facility, but you just go to the orbital relay and you can then repair your units. So that's the orbital relay, and then obviously it works as a teleport, so you need 2 of them. I actually have more than one installed, so you can see I have transfer to Lialandrail and transfer to Levinsk. All right, so you just basically go onto the relay and just teleport just like you would with the normal teleport. Now the next option that you have with regards to teleports, going back into my military queue again, which is that one, sorry, my society queue, there we go, is the forward relay. Now what the forward relay is you can, instead of just creating a forward base, you can create a forward relay. All right, now once you've created this forward relay, you can't turn it into a sector. If you want to turn it into an orbital relay sector, you'll have to raise it and then recreate it. But where it comes in really, really useful is when you want to attack an enemy that's declared war on you that's a long way away. Because what you can do is you can basically go off and you can get one of your units, like one of your scouts, your Shrike. You can then go to a sector that's close to your enemy, drop a forward relay, and then you can then teleport your troops right in. So you don't have to move your troops all the way across the map. So really, really great for being able to kind of really deploy your troops much further out than you ever could before. So yeah, it's an interesting mechanic. It's going to make the game much more interesting. It means you can get involved in more wars. One other thing that you should be aware of is if you go into your diplomacy, and if we pick someone that I've got a defensive pact with, then what you can do is we can negotiate, and you can see here on the left, up and relay. So you can make your relays available to your allies that you have a defensive pact with. And you can either do it full time or you can open it for a shared duration. They go up and relay agreement for a fixed duration. All right, so that kind of covers the relays. Good stuff. Right, next up, Imperial Defenses. Now, Imperial Defenses used to just be sites that you would visit. There would be like a marauder on them. So here we go. I've got one right in the middle of my screen right here, which is an Imperial Defense. And so you would attack the site, and once you destroy the enemies, it would just destroy. Now it doesn't. What happens is if it's not in a sector that's claimed by anybody, that's owned by anybody, should I say, then it will just go inert and it won't do anything. But once you actually put it into a sector that belongs to a colony, so it becomes activated. And what I mean by that is it does 2 things. The first thing is it will create a militia with the same power as your sector base. So you can see you now have an extra militia there for the same power of 760. What it will then also do, depending on the type that it is, so if I click on it, for me it's a gravity generator. Okay, you can see now it says here, the owner of this structure will unlock this operation, concentrated gravity flux. And what it does is it gives me an extra strategic operation. And if I go into my strategic operations, you can see it here on the left, concentrated gravity flux originates from one strategic location. And then what that does is it basically restricts, this particular one restricts movements for my enemies in the colony's domain. All right, so that's pretty cool. You know, it's another feature that we can now use. So these are now no longer just a combat site, they actually have strategic value as well. Now, next up is auto combat and retries. So normally before, what would happen is if you went into combat and you go, you know what, I'll just do auto combat for this one, and the results are not what you wanted. And then you're frustrated because unless you've done a save game beforehand, then you can't go back and redo it. So now you have a retry option. So if I take one of my armies, I'm going to attack my friends here. So I'm going to end up creating a war, but we need to do this. So I'm going to start the war. Yeah, declare war. Okay, and now I'm going to start the auto combat. And what's going to happen is at the end of the auto combat, I now have an extra button down here on the left hand side, which is retry. And what that will do is it will mean that instead of doing the auto combat, I now have the option of going in and trying with the manual combat. So very useful, especially if you don't get the results that you were expecting with auto combat, you now have the ability to go in and do it on a manual basis. So that's that. I'm going to take my reward because I won that. Next thing is racial colony structures. So every race in its skill queue, so I think it's under my social one. Yeah, so every race in its skill queue has a structure that's available specifically to them. So for me, under this tier 5, I have under Gaian Stewardship, I have Arborean Survey Station, which is an Amazon only. Now before, you could only put these colony structures in Amazon colonies. Now you can put them in any race where you own the colony. So for example, I recently defeated the Dvar here in Fastapol, and I have a Dvar colony. And if I click on it and go to my structures, you can see that I can now create this Arborean Survey Station in a Dvar colony, which I couldn't do before. So that's covered. What's up next? Oh yeah, road mountain hexes. Now this one's actually, I should have mentioned this in the movement, but it's really, really useful because it used to be really frustrating. And I can show you right here. So before, if you had a mountain range, you would not get a road between your various sectors and your colony. And so that would really restrict movements of your troops. Now what's changed, if there's only one sector of mountain between the sector and the colony, when you create the sector, it will build a road through it. It will erase that mountain hex like it has done here and create a road. So that's really going to help movement around, especially with the Dvar, because the Dvar normally get put into a mountain environment. And one of the great difficulties with the Dvar is expanding out because your colony is kind of crushed between all these mountains. So hopefully now it will make it easier to get the Dvar out and get them more maneuverable, especially with their heavy units, which I mentioned before. And next up is knowledge. Now knowledge, if I go back and pick on a colony and go to production, right down the bottom here, this generate knowledge. This used to be really high up in the skill queue, and you would have to get to kind of mid-game before you could get to that point where you could generate knowledge. That's now changed, that's been eradicated. You can now generate knowledge from the beginning of the game. So if you really want to focus on knowledge rather than building troops, so let's say you're playing the Syndicate and you want to do like covert ops and things like that, then you can then now really focus the training on knowledge instead of focusing on the energy side. So really useful on that. Okay, and now we're going to move on to heroes. Now a few changes with the heroes. The main change with the heroes is, if I click on a hero, let's click on this one, is that the starting hit points or vitality used to be 60, they now start at 50, so they've had a debuff. All right, but that's because of a big change when it comes to vehicles. So with vehicles, if I click on here and go down to my vehicles, right, before a vehicle, the stats of the vehicle used to replace the stats of the hero. And so whilst that was great at the start of the game, where you would basically have fairly good stats on your hero, but your vehicle had better stats. But as you got later on in the game, you actually ended up getting rid of your vehicle because your hero did better without it. And what's happened now is that all the stats for the vehicle are a bonus and an addition to whatever stats you have already with your hero. So for example, here with the Harrier, you can see that I don't get any extra vitality points, but I get an extra shield point. If I look at the Bulwark, you can see I don't get extra vitality points, but I do get an extra armor point. And so the vehicles and the choice of vehicles now is kind of more relevant to the kind of play the style that you want. If you want more shields, use the Harrier. If you want the more armor points, you go for the Bulwark, and so forth and so on. And then these stack. So really, really good news. Also, the other thing they've done is if I go into these skill points, and I need a hero that's slightly higher up. So let me go down to my commander. Where's my commander? I've lost my commander. Okay, I will find another one that's got more skill points. Ta-da. Let's have a look. There we go, level 7. Perfect. Right, so Piloting Advanced. Piloting Advanced used to be a level 8 skill, and as you can see at the top here, I'm level 7. It is now a level 6 skill. So Advanced Piloting is now easier to get into. Also, it requires less skill points. Before it used to require 10 skill points, it now only requires 8. So there is a really strong focus in trying to get you into your vehicles, which is great news. So it means now you're going to be able to do more with your vehicles with heroes. So that kind of wraps it up for the heroes. And then I am going to cover ships next. Now ships we never really used because they kind of didn't do much and they were kind of expensive. And what's now changed with the ships, there are two main things. The first one is that we don't have tier 1 ships anymore. And instead of getting tier 1 ships at the beginning, so if I go to Ellendale, my colony, and go down, you can now see that your base ship is actually a tier 2. And then where you used to get your tier 2 ships in the skill tree, you've now got the tier 3. So let me go into that and scroll back. So here we go. So you can see tier level 3 or tier 3, you now get a tier 3 ship instead of a tier 2 ship. So you can get into stronger ships and they can be much more effective much earlier in game. On top of that, they cost less to produce and their upkeep have been reduced as well. So you don't end up with a fleet that costs you a lot of production points and isn't very powerful, not doing anything. That's now changed. Fleets are now going to be much more effective. So hopefully that means that you kind of be more enticed to wage war on the water as well. While before it's been pretty much just used as a barrier, stopping people from attacking you. So that covers the ships, and then we come on to combat. So I'm just going to sort of browse over the combat because I said a lot of it is to do with sort of specific weapon changes and things like that. The main things to be aware of is that with tier 3 units, these have all pretty much been made stronger. Tier 3 units weren't really used much in the game simply because they were costly to produce in terms of time, and they weren't that strong. So you were generally better off creating 3 tier 1 units rather than keep creating 1 tier 3 unit. So now their abilities have been enhanced, and so they are now much more favourable, and they have kind of more meaning in the game, and so you're more likely to use them when you get to higher units. You can see for myself that out of habit, in my skill tree, I didn't train up these top units because the Bombardon, Pteranodon, and the Arborean, just because they didn't really offer that much value. I was better off getting the smaller units, the tier 1s and tier 2s. So that's now changed. So we shall see. That is a tier 3. Oh, these are tier 5s, yeah. So it would have been, so the Arborean commune, for example, is a tier 2. So it would be my Harriers in this case. So it would be Where are my tier 3s? Oh, my tier 3s are... I'm lost. There we go. No, tier 2s. Tier 4s. Okay, I'm sure they're in there somewhere, but just to be aware, tier 3 units have been buffed. Right, next up, sprinting into Melee Overwatch. Before, if you did a sprint, use up all your action points to move your units forward, you couldn't then get them into Melee Overwatch. That's now changed, you now can. So that's great when you want to stop your enemies from advancing and getting too close to your range units. You can rush your like Kirko frenzied forward, and they will be able to do their Melee Overwatch after their attack, which is great. Next up, cover bonuses are less effective, and that's down to a change in the stacking. That before, or what they've done now, is that the cover bonus takes effect after the harder to hit bonuses. And what that's done is effectively reduce the percentage that you get from the stacking bonuses. So just be aware that if you do that, your cover is no longer as effective as it used to be. Then status effects mods have been debuffed, and what that means is if we go into my hero here and we pick something like the incinerator module, before it used to do a standard amount of damage whether you did 1 hit with it or you did 3 hits. Now what happens is you get a higher value on a 1 hit, and if you get repeating attacks, like you can do 3 hits, then you get less. So you can see that before you'd have got 10 for the incinerator module overall. Now for a single hit you get 12, and for repeating hits you get 8. So that means the maximum you can get is 24 on repeating attacks rather than before where you got 30. So it's kind of a buff and a debuff all at the same time. So that affects all status effect mods. And then finally the AI. The AI now will favor melees over ranged attacks. And I've noticed that been playing the game recently since the changes, that they do try and rush you a lot more. And they try and flank you a lot more and are much more aggressive in advancing towards you. They also now will try and use their staggers abilities more, especially if you've got full action points. They're going to try and stagger you so that you can't do melee overwatches and things like that. So just be aware of that. And then the last thing is the AIs will also now use their abilities more. So if they have abilities available, they will try and favor that and make use of that. So there you go. So that pretty much covers it. Like I said, for all the details, please look at the patch notes in the description. I hope you found that useful. And if you like what I do, please subscribe. If you don't, then give me a dislike. If you liked it, give me a like. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications, as I do release quite regularly. And that wraps it up for this video. I think I'm going to do a one-handed goodbye this time.